In this video, I'd like to show some enhancements to Illuminated Cloud support for Lightning Web Components development. Specifically, how you can bind to base platform features such as the standard APIs and modules for Lightning Web Components development, server-side logic you may have in Aura-enabled Apex symbols, your schema, objects and fields, information stored in static resources and content assets, behavior on standard components in the Lightning namespace, and your custom components, message catalog labels, I18N context, whatever it happens to be. You get access to this through ES6 imports. So in this case, we're creating this component. It extends Lightning element. We need to actually import that. So the way we would normally do that is we type import. We're going to actually do that in an import list. We'd say from and either do a double quoted or single quoted string, some type of string literal. And now we would actually say where we're importing from. And now it shows all the Salesforce-specific import context, as well as if you had expressed any additional dependencies via NPM, it would show any modules available from that as well. So in this case, we know that Lightning element exists in the LWC module. So we'll go ahead and say LWC there. And then when we begin to add completions for the import items, we can now see things that are exported from that module. So Lightning element, we'll go ahead and add some of our selectors that are commonly used. So API, track, we'll add wire, things like that. So it makes pretty quick work of that. There's actually an easier way to do that. The issue was that we had to stub out the beginning of that statement, go to the right to say where we're importing from, and then go back to the left and say what we're importing. This is analogous to writing a select statement in the query language, where you really want to say I'm selecting from this object and now I'm selecting these things from that object. And that has made quite a bit easier in terms of the workflow of writing that with live templates in Illuminated Cloud, like the SCL live template that takes you first to the from statement and then takes you back to the select list. Well, there are live templates that have already existed in the commercial JetBrains IDEs, for example, import items, that allow you to jump straight to the right. We'll go ahead and recreate the statement above and then take you back to the import list. So now we'll just say Lightning element, API, you get the idea. So I certainly encourage the use of these live templates. Let's take a look at another one real quick for importing the default export of a module. So we'll say import default, and now it's going to bring us over, and we'll say user. We're just going to get the user ID, and we'll go ahead and say ID, and now we have ID. So it'll actually get the default export from that module and go ahead and import it for you using that name. So that makes quick work of creating these import statements. We'll do one more to get from the record API. We need to be able to create records and update records and delete records. As you can see, I typed about 6 letters there, and the import statement's completely done. So standard modules and APIs, very, very easy. Now, there is one downside to those 2 live templates. I'll show it right now, and that is if you have chain completions. So why don't we go ahead and say import default again, and we'll say that we want to import an Aura-enabled method from an Apex class. So I'll say Apex, and unfortunately it didn't allow us to specify the Apex class. It automatically bumped us after the first selection over to the select list, the import list, and you can see that it's not correct. So for that, I've actually added new live templates that are variants on the other. You can see this is an import statement allowing for further code completions. So we'll do import default to. There's also an import items to. We'll say Apex, and now it automatically begins another completion. And then I'll say dot, and I can see my methods that are Aura enabled. And now I can just come back over here and just say I want to import get expenses, and that's it. Now we've imported that and can reference that Aura enabled method as get expenses. Similar with schema objects. If I say import default to, and now we're going to say schema, and now it's going to show us all of our objects. And as always with Illuminated Cloud, you don't have to specify namespaces. You just choose the available completion. It'll automatically prepend the namespace if appropriate. And so we'll choose that object, and we'll choose this field on that object, and we're going to actually import that as checkbox. So we'll be able to reference that field as checkbox, and we'll go ahead and get an object as well. So we'll go ahead and bring in shopping list, schema, and now shopping list. And that's it. We'll bring in that object. And now what we'll do is bring that in as shopping list. So that would be how you can import schema objects and actually have those available for reference in your ES6 component. And now as far as accessing information in other components, for example, let's say we wanted to be able to manipulate a lightning button from the standard component library. So I'm going to say import items, and I'm going to say button. There's lightning button. And now it's going to show me the methods that are available for that. So I need to be able to click on that button. That's what I want. If I also want to be able to focus on the button, I could add that. And if I want to do a custom component, again, I've got to use the to variant. So import items to, and I'm going to say I want this from the local namespace. It's going to show me my local components. And we'll go ahead and say that we want from UI component to import something. And we'll come over here and I'm going to import, do something with that component, and get the foo property. So makes it easy to be able to access the exported behavior of system components and of your custom components. Static resources, content assets are going to be very similar. Import default to, and we're going to go ahead and say resource URL, and I'm going to import this shopping list styles, which is a CSS file, and I'm going to import that as shopping list styles. And similar with a content asset, import default to asset, and we'll get this image. And we'll just call that image. Message catalogs, import default to, and I'm going to say label. It's going to show me all the labels that I have in my local message catalogs. I'm going to bring an add comment label, and we'll call that the add comment label. And finally, import default. Default, there we go. And we'll go ahead and get the currency symbol. And so we'll call that currency symbol. So that's imported. So quick work of importing these. There should be code completions for pretty much everything in the standard API. If there's not, certainly bring that to my attention. I'll take care of it. One other thing I want to show before I jump over to the Community Edition IDE is that if you're using a commercial IDE, IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate Edition, WebStorm, PyCharm, PHPStorm, RubyMine, you'll notice that things are properly injected with references. So you see things highlighting as I move over them. That's actually very important because it allows you to do a few things. For one thing, you can actually easily navigate to and view the backing implementation of the referenced thing. So here's this field, here's this object, just kind of moving down. Here's this component. Here is this method exported from that component. Here is this custom component and the method exported from it. Here is the CSS stored in a static resource. And here is an image file as a content asset, our message catalog label. You get the idea. But it also allows things to participate in refactoring now, again, only when paired with the commercial IDEs. So for example, get expenses here, if we look for all references of it, we can see that it's actually used in multiple contexts. It's used in an Apex context in the unit test for that controller. It's used here in this Lightning Web component, and it's used in an Aura component. Maybe I'm migrating from the Aura component to a Lightning Web component, and right now there are multiple references. If I rename this, this now participates in the rename. We can see that all the references were properly updated for renames to Apex symbols, renames to, for example, here's a static resource, and static resource is used both here and in a Visualforce page. And if I rename the static resource file, it renames all the references to it properly. We'll undo that. It's an atomic undo. Same with content assets. I'm going to be implementing this also so that you can rename your components in total, and so that you can rename message catalog labels. Those are not implemented yet, but once they are, they'll participate in this rename refactoring behavior. So it begins to tie together everything across your Salesforce code base very nicely and allow you to evolve it in total. So this is what things look like in the commercial IDEs, where you have access to JetBrains world-class tooling for web development. Let's take a look at what it looks like when you're in one of the free base IDEs, whether it's IntelliJ IDEA Community Edition or whether it's PyCharm Community Edition. So you will not at this point get the reference injection and the participation in rename, but you do get all the same code completions. So for example, if I want to do the same import, and in fact, it has the same live templates. So we'll go ahead and say import items. And now we get all those completions. Here's LWC, Lightning Element, Wire. We can take a look at things, track, API. If I wanted to say import default to, whoops, I want to say import default. And we'll go ahead and do that from user ID again, and I'll go ahead and import ID. So again, makes very short work of that. Now we'll do import default to from Apex, and we'll go ahead and say expense controller dot get expenses, and it'll automatically prompt us to do get expenses. And I'll do one more. I won't go exhaustive on this, but import default to from schema, and we'll go ahead and say that from shopping list item we want to get amount, and we want to import that as amount. So makes very quick work of imports even in the free base IDE. You can see that things are not highlighting as I mouse over them. I have considered adding reference injection to the free IDEs. It's a much tougher thing because you don't have the benefit of first-class support for the underlying language, but I do think that there's value in being able to participate in things like rename refactorings. The other thing that I want to show is that the syntax highlighting is improved quite a bit in Community Edition. The ES6 specific keywords like import and export, default, extends, class, those things are highlighting properly. Once you update to this version of the plugin or a higher version, you'll notice that in file types, just as we had access to improved CSS highlighting, syntax highlighting in Community Edition, there's now improved JavaScript syntax highlighting. Upon updating, you'll be prompted once if you're running Community Edition as to whether you want to switch to this particular file type. If you do, it'll automatically switch over and you'll get better syntax highlighting. If you choose not to, you can always switch over just by adding star.js to this file type. If you don't want that, that's fine. Just decline it and you'll be using standard file highlighting, or maybe you're using TextMate Bundles plugin or something like that. That's completely fine. But I did want to provide much better syntax highlighting and kind of visual cues around ES6 versus the older versions of JavaScript that have been used previously in Visualforce and in Aura. So these are some of the enhancements that have been added. There will be quite a bit more. Basically, I'm investing right now in Lightning Web Components and trying to make it 100% whole. The idea is that if there are places where code completion should be offered and they're not now, they will be offered and the correct ones will be offered. If there are places where references should be injected so that you can navigate through to the backing definition, specifically in the 4 pay-based IDEs, the commercial-based IDEs, those will be added and they will navigate to the correct location so that everything hangs together properly. I hope that you found this useful. I hope that you find the feature useful. If you find any issues, certainly report them to me. And thank you for your time.